Your father's factory is gone, Miss Whitmore. The words hit Charlotte Whitmore harder than the heat rolling across the parking lot. 5 different safety teams had already said the same thing in 5 different ways. Structural collapse risk. Chemical exposure risk. Internal pressure instability. Every expert standing behind the yellow barricades wore the same expression now. Defeat. The factory burned against the Ohio night like a dying city. Thick smoke clawed into the sky. Red emergency lights bounced across shattered windows and rain-soaked pavement. Charlotte stood frozen near the command truck, her white blouse streaked with ash, her heels sinking into puddles blackened by soot. Somewhere behind those concrete walls was the last thing her father had ever built with his own hands. Whitmore Medical Supply had survived recessions, lawsuits, and 20 brutal winters. But tonight, the fire was winning. "Ma'am, you need to step farther back," a deputy warned gently. She barely heard him. Her eyes stayed locked on the Upper East Wing where flames pulsed behind the glass like a living thing breathing in slow motion. Nora Ellis, her assistant, gripped an umbrella beside her with trembling fingers. "Charlotte," she whispered carefully. "They're saying the roof won't hold another 10 minutes. Charlotte swallowed hard. The taste of smoke sat bitter on her tongue. "There are pediatric insulin reserves in Warehouse C," she said quietly. 3 hospitals are waiting on those shipments by morning." No one answered her. Because everyone already knew. The supplies were gone. The factory was gone. Her father's legacy was gone. Then someone moved through the crowd. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just steady. A tall black man in a faded fire jacket stepped past 2 parked engines carrying a small red backpack over one shoulder. Rain dripped from the brim of his cap. His face looked tired in the flashing lights, older than the rest of the crew around him. Marcus Reed. Off shift nearly 2 hours already. One of the younger firefighters noticed him first. "Reed? Thought you clocked out." Marcus glanced once toward the burning building. "I did." His voice stayed calm. Low. Controlled. Then he looked toward the east side of the factory where smoke pushed strangely through the vents. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Why is the pressure venting from the old side?" One of the safety supervisors gave a sharp laugh. "Because the place is cooking from the inside out." Marcus didn't react. He kept watching the smoke. Watching the rhythm of it. Then quietly, almost to himself, he asked, "Anybody got the original construction plans?" The question drifted through the rain for a second before anyone answered it. Then Daniel Price folded his arms beneath his reflective jacket and let out another short laugh. "Original plans?" he said. "This building has been renovated 4 times since 2006. Marcus finally looked at him. Calm eyes. No challenge in them. "That was not my question." The wind shifted hard across the parking lot, carrying sparks high into the dark sky. Somewhere inside the factory, metal groaned like an old ship under pressure. Charlotte felt it in her chest. Marcus stepped closer to the folding table beside the command truck where stacks of emergency paperwork sat soaked beneath plastic covers. "Your father designed this place himself?" he asked her quietly. Charlotte hesitated. "The first version, yes. Then there is probably an old emergency pressure route hidden somewhere in the original layout." Daniel shook his head immediately. "We already checked the modern vent systems." "Modern systems fail," Marcus replied softly. "Old engineers planned for panic." Something about the way he said it made Charlotte stop breathing for half a second. Not because it sounded dramatic. Because it sounded true. Marcus studied the smoke again. It was not rising evenly. One side pulsed darker every few seconds, like pressure building behind a blocked channel. He pointed toward the east wing. "The fire keeps pulling air from one direction. That means something underneath is still drawing oxygen." One of the other safety officers frowned. "What are you saying?" "I am saying the building is trying not to explode." Silence followed that. Rain tapped steadily against the trucks. Somewhere behind them, paramedics rolled another hose across the pavement. Charlotte looked at Marcus more carefully now. The faded jacket. The tired face. The backpack hanging from his shoulder with a small pink keychain attached to the zipper. Not arrogance. Not performance. Just observation. Even if you are right, Daniel snapped, nobody is going inside that structure now. Marcus nodded once. Probably not through the front. Then he turned toward Charlotte again. Miss Whitmore, where are your archived construction records kept? Basement administration level. Paper copies? Yes. He looked back at the building. Then your father may have accidentally saved this place. Charlotte stared at him through the rain. You think there is still a chance? Marcus did not answer immediately. He watched the smoke another moment before speaking. I think your building is trying to tell us where it hurts. Behind the barricade, a small voice suddenly called out. Daddy! Charlotte turned. Near the ambulance bay sat a little girl wrapped in a firefighter blanket, holding a cold grilled cheese sandwich in both hands. Ava Reed. Marcus's daughter. The moment Marcus heard her voice, something in his expression softened completely. He walked over, crouched beside her, and brushed damp curls from her forehead. You staying warm for me? He asked gently. Ava nodded sleepily. You always go back for people. Marcus smiled faintly. Yeah, baby. Charlotte watched silently as the man everyone had dismissed moments ago tucked the blanket tighter around his little girl before turning back toward the burning factory again. Charlotte Whitmore had spent most of her adult life surrounded by men who spoke loudly when they wanted authority. Investors. Attorneys. Consultants. Politicians. Every room she walked into demanded confidence sharpened into performance. But Marcus Reed barely raised his voice above the rain, and somehow the entire command area kept falling silent around him. Nora returned 10 minutes later carrying a dented metal storage box wrapped in a plastic tarp. Archives pulled from lower administration, she said breathlessly. Most of them are water damaged. Marcus stepped beside the folding table and opened the box carefully. Old paper. Handwritten notes. Blueprints yellowed at the edges. Charlotte immediately recognized her father's block handwriting across the margins. The sight hit her harder than the fire itself. For a second, she was 12 years old again, sitting beside him at the kitchen counter while he sketched pipe routes on napkins during dinner. Your father did not trust computers much, did he? Marcus asked quietly. Charlotte almost smiled despite herself. He trusted people less. Marcus nodded like he understood exactly what she meant. He spread the blueprints beneath the emergency floodlights while rain tapped steadily across the plastic covering overhead. Daniel crossed his arms nearby. This is wasting time. Marcus ignored him completely. His finger moved slowly across the faded drawings until he suddenly stopped near the eastern foundation wall. There. Charlotte leaned closer. What is that? Steam release tunnel. Daniel frowned immediately. That was sealed decades ago. Officially, Marcus said. But your father never removed it from the structural routing. Charlotte stared down at the blueprint. A narrow maintenance corridor connected directly beneath Warehouse C. If pressure still traveled through that tunnel, it could explain the strange breathing pattern in the smoke. Marcus traced another line carefully. If the tunnel stayed partially open after renovations, heat would keep building underneath the east side. Meaning? Nora asked softly. Marcus looked toward the burning building again. Meaning everybody has been fighting the flames above ground while pressure keeps feeding below it. Daniel exhaled sharply. Even if that tunnel exists, nobody can reach it now. Marcus folded the blueprint slowly. There is an exterior utility hatch on the south side. Daniel blinked. How did you even see that? Marcus shrugged once. My grandfather repaired old buildings in Detroit. He used to say old factories hide secrets in plain sight. Charlotte studied him quietly now. There was no ego in him. No hunger for attention. Just patience. Calm observation. The kind built from years of listening instead of talking. Another deep metallic groan rolled through the night. Several firefighters turned instinctively toward the building. The smoke suddenly darkened along the eastern roofline. Marcus looked at Charlotte directly for the first time since arriving. "Miss Whitmore," he said softly, "if that pressure tunnel collapses before somebody vents it manually, the entire east wing goes with it." Charlotte felt cold despite the heat surrounding them. "Can it still be stopped?" Marcus looked back toward the flames. "Maybe." Then, after a small pause, he added quietly, "But somebody has to get underneath it first." The rain finally started coming down harder, turning the parking lot into a mirror of red emergency lights and drifting smoke. Firefighters moved quickly between hoses and supply crates, their boots splashing through inches of dirty water. But near the command truck, nobody moved for several seconds after Marcus spoke. Everybody understood what he was really saying. Somebody would have to crawl beneath a burning factory alone. Daniel Price shook his head immediately. "No chance. The south utility line collapsed an hour ago." Marcus looked at him calmly. "Did you physically check it?" Daniel opened his mouth, then stopped. Marcus already knew the answer. Charlotte noticed it too. The silence. The hesitation. 5 professional teams had spent the night studying screens, thermal drones, and pressure charts. But nobody had actually looked underneath the building itself. Marcus folded the blueprint carefully and handed it back to Charlotte. "Your father built this place before digital systems took over," he said quietly. "Men from his generation trusted backup exits more than computers." Another low rumble rolled beneath the pavement. Not explosive. Worse. Structural shifting. The east wing lights flickered once behind the smoke before disappearing completely. Nora covered her mouth. "Oh my God!" Daniel grabbed his radio instantly. "Pull everybody another 50 feet back." Crews started moving equipment away from the barricades. Charlotte watched the factory through the rain, her breathing shallow now. She remembered standing in that same building at 16 years old while her father walked her through the production floor after midnight. He used to say factories sounded alive when everyone else went home. Tonight, the building sounded wounded. Marcus stepped toward engine 12 and reached for an oxygen tank. Daniel caught his arm immediately. "You are off shift." Marcus looked down at the hand gripping his sleeve. "Not angry. Just tired." "Then call me a volunteer. You do not even know if the tunnel is open." "No," Marcus replied softly. "I know everybody assumed it was closed." Daniel lowered his voice. "This is not worth your life." Marcus glanced once toward Ava sitting inside the ambulance bay wrapped in her blanket. Then he looked back at the fire. "There are workers still unaccounted for inside Warehouse C." Charlotte blinked sharply. "What?" Nora checked her tablet with shaking hands. 3 maintenance staff never badged out." The words changed everything. The air itself seemed to tighten around them. Marcus secured the oxygen tank against his jacket in one smooth motion. "If the tunnel connects beneath the east wing, there is still a path under the pressure zone." Daniel stared at him in disbelief. "You are talking about crawling under a burning chemical warehouse." Marcus adjusted his gloves quietly. "I am talking about bringing people home." Charlotte stepped toward him before she fully realized she was moving. Rain clung to her hair and lashes. "Marcus." He looked at her. For the first time all night, uncertainty crossed her face completely unguarded. Not CEO. Not executive. Just a frightened daughter watching her father's life work disappear. "If you go in there," she whispered carefully, "you might not make it back out." Marcus held her gaze for a long second while smoke rolled behind him into the black Ohio sky. Then he answered with the same calm voice he had carried all night. "That is usually how fire works, Miss Whitmore." Marcus pulled the breathing mask over his face while rainwater slid from the edge of his helmet in steady streams. Around him, the command area moved with nervous energy now. Radios crackled. Firefighters shouted distances and pressure numbers over the wind. But beneath all of it sat something heavier. Fear. Not panic. The quiet kind professionals carried when they knew somebody might not come back. Daniel stepped beside him again, jaw tight with frustration. At least wait for another team. Marcus secured the oxygen line calmly. There is no time. You cannot go underneath that structure alone. Marcus checked the pressure gauge once. Then tell somebody to follow me. Nobody spoke. The silence answered for them. Charlotte stood several feet away watching him prepare. The strange thing was not his courage. It was how ordinary he made it look. No speeches. No drama. Just a tired man tightening worn gloves beneath cold rain like he had done difficult things his entire life without asking anybody to notice. Ava sat up straighter inside the ambulance bay when she saw her father walking toward the barricade. Daddy, she called softly. Marcus stopped immediately and turned back. The giant burning factory behind him looked almost unreal now through the smoke and rain, but the moment he looked at his daughter, the hardness in his face disappeared completely. Ava held the firefighter blanket tighter around her shoulders. Do not forget your flashlight this time. A few nearby paramedics smiled despite themselves. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and held up the flashlight. Got it right here. And your lucky coin? He patted another pocket gently. Still got that too. Ava nodded once, satisfied. Okay. Marcus walked back toward her for just a second and crouched beside the ambulance step. Charlotte could not hear everything over the rain, only pieces. You stay warm for me. Yes, sir. Listen to Miss Nora if I am late. Ava looked at him carefully then. Children always knew when adults were afraid, even when adults pretended otherwise. You are coming back though, right? Marcus smiled softly behind the edge of the oxygen mask. Not a fake smile. Not forced confidence. Just warmth. I am going to try real hard, baby. Charlotte looked away for a moment after hearing that. Something inside her chest tightened unexpectedly. She had spent years around powerful men who promised impossible things with perfect confidence. But this man only promised effort. Honesty. Presence. Somehow it felt stronger. Marcus stood again and turned toward the south side access road where smoke drifted low across the pavement like fog. Daniel grabbed his radio. Engine 12, prepare emergency extraction support. Marcus stopped near Charlotte one last time. Rain tapped against both of them, while orange firelight flickered across her pale face. Up close, he could see she looked exhausted. Not physically. Soul-deep exhausted. The kind built from years of carrying expectations too heavy for one person alone. She held out the folded blueprint toward him with shaking fingers. My father used to say this building had a heartbeat, she whispered quietly. Marcus accepted the blueprint and looked toward the burning east wing again. Old buildings remember the people who built them. Charlotte swallowed hard. And if the tunnel collapses? Marcus tucked the blueprint safely inside his jacket. Then we will know we were too late. Before she could answer, he turned and disappeared into the smoke rolling along the south perimeter fence while emergency lights flashed behind him through the rain like distant lightning. The south perimeter road was almost invisible beneath the smoke. Marcus moved slowly along the chain-link fence with one gloved hand brushing cold metal, while the other held his flashlight low against the ground. Rain hissed against hot concrete around him. Somewhere above, the factory groaned again like an exhausted animal refusing to fall. The flashlight beam cut through drifting smoke until it finally caught the outline of a rusted steel hatch half buried beneath weeds and broken gravel. Marcus stopped. There it was. Old. Forgotten. Hidden behind 30 years of expansion and fresh paint. He knelt beside it and wiped ash across the faded warning label. Steam access utility corridor. He exhaled once through the mask. Thank you, old man, he murmured quietly to Charlotte's father, though nobody could hear him. Back near the command trucks, Daniel listened through the emergency radio clipped to Marcus's shoulder. Every sound came through distorted beneath static and rain. Metal scraping. Heavy breathing. The dull groan of shifting pipes somewhere underground. Charlotte stood beside the radio table now without speaking. She had not moved in nearly 5 minutes. Nora finally touched her arm carefully. You should sit down for a second. Charlotte shook her head immediately. If he is still standing, I am still standing. Nora looked at her with surprise. The woman speaking now did not sound like the cold executive who negotiated billion-dollar contracts without blinking. She sounded human. Frightened. Real. On the south side, Marcus wedged a steel tool beneath the hatch handle and pulled hard. At first nothing happened. Then with a deep rusty scream, the hatch shifted open just enough for heat to rush upward into the rain. Not flames. Steam. Pressurized air. Marcus aimed the flashlight downward into darkness. Narrow ladder. Concrete tunnel. Old pipes running east beneath the factory foundation exactly where the blueprint predicted. But another sound reached him too. Faint. Human. He froze completely and listened again. A cough. Weak. Distant. Somebody was alive underneath the east wing. Marcus grabbed the radio immediately. Command, I have possible survivors below ground. The entire command station snapped to attention. Daniel straightened instantly. Repeat that. I heard movement inside the utility tunnel. Charlotte pressed one trembling hand against the edge of the table. Oh my God! Marcus looked down into the darkness again. Steam rolled upward around his mask in slow waves. Tunnel is unstable, he continued calmly. But there is still airflow moving east. Daniel grabbed another radio. I am sending backup. No, Marcus replied immediately. Too narrow. One person only. Daniel slammed a hand against the truck. Damn it, Reed. Marcus ignored the frustration in his voice. He adjusted the oxygen tank once more and tested the ladder carefully with his boot. Old metal. Slick from years of condensation. Marcus. Charlotte's voice came through the radio suddenly. Softer than before. He paused. Yes, ma'am? Rain crackled across the signal between them. For a moment she did not speak at all. Then finally quietly. Please come back. Marcus closed his eyes for half a second after hearing that. Not because of romance. Not because of drama. Because after hours of smoke and orders and panic, somebody had finally spoken to him like his life mattered too. He opened his eyes again and looked down into the darkness beneath the burning factory. I will do my best, he answered gently. Then he clipped the flashlight onto his jacket, lowered himself onto the old ladder, and disappeared beneath the earth while rain continued falling above him through the Ohio night. The tunnel smelled like rust, steam, and old concrete soaked from decades of hidden leaks. Marcus moved carefully down the narrow corridor with one hand sliding along the wall to steady himself while the flashlight beam bounced across pipes overhead. The deeper he went, the hotter the air became. Sweat gathered beneath his collar despite the cold rainwater still dripping from his jacket. Somewhere far above him, the factory continued groaning under pressure. But down here, beneath the chaos, everything felt strangely quiet. Just breathing. Steam hissing. Footsteps splashing through shallow water. Then another cough echoed through the darkness ahead. Closer this time. Marcus stopped immediately and raised the flashlight. Fire department, he called calmly through the mask. If you can hear me, answer back. Silence for a second. Then a weak voice somewhere ahead whispered, Help! Marcus moved faster now. The tunnel narrowed sharply near the eastern foundation where old support beams crowded the passage. Pipes rattled overhead from the heat building above them. He reached a locked maintenance gate half warped from years of moisture and pulled hard against it. Nothing. Jammed shut. Marcus checked the hinges once, then used a steel pry tool against the lower latch until the metal finally gave way with a sharp crack. Behind the gate, the flashlight beam caught three figures huddled beside a flooded service panel. 2 men. 1 woman. Covered in soot and condensation but alive. One of the maintenance workers shielded his eyes against the light. We thought everybody left us. Marcus crouched beside them immediately. Can everybody stand? The woman nodded weakly. One man shook his head. Ankle twisted. Marcus checked the injured worker quickly while speaking into the radio clipped near his shoulder. Command, I found all 3 maintenance staff alive inside the East Utility Corridor. The command station erupted with voices at once. Charlotte grabbed the nearest radio before anybody else could answer. Are they okay? Marcus adjusted the injured worker's arm carefully across his shoulder. Scared. Exhausted. But breathing. Charlotte closed her eyes for one brief second after hearing that. Nora saw tears mix with rain along her face for the first time all night. Down inside the tunnel, Marcus looked farther east where thick steam rolled heavily from a large pressure pipe disappearing beneath the factory floor. The sound coming from it had changed now. Louder. Faster. He already knew what that meant. Time was running out. Listen carefully, he told the workers. You are going to head back exactly the way I came in. Slow steps. Stay against the left wall. The injured man frowned immediately. What about you? Marcus looked toward the pressure tunnel again. I still have one thing to finish. No, the woman whispered quickly. It is getting worse down here. Marcus gave her a calm look that somehow steadied the entire tunnel. That is exactly why I have to stay. Above ground, Daniel suddenly noticed something changing in the smoke pattern over the east wing. The thick black clouds pulsed unevenly now like air trying to escape through a blocked artery. Reed, he barked into the radio. Whatever you are doing, do it fast. Marcus helped the injured worker stand fully before turning his flashlight toward the far end of the tunnel where an enormous red pressure valve sat half hidden behind steam and darkness. Even from 30 feet away, he could hear the violent strain inside the pipes. The old system was failing. Marcus took one long breath behind the oxygen mask while the 3 workers stared at him in silence. Then quietly, almost like a father reassuring frightened children, he said, Follow the light back home. I will catch up. The workers disappeared slowly into the darkness behind him, their flashlight beams shaking against the tunnel walls as they followed the path back toward the surface. Marcus waited until he heard their footsteps growing farther away before turning fully toward the pressure valve. Steam rolled around it in thick waves now, filling the corridor with a low metallic scream that vibrated through the concrete beneath his boots. The old system was reaching its limit. Marcus stepped closer carefully. The valve wheel was enormous, nearly 3 feet across, painted red decades ago but now faded beneath rust and heat stains. He wiped condensation from the side panel and aimed his flashlight at the pressure gauge beside it. The needle had buried itself deep into the red zone. Too high. Way too high. Above ground, Daniel watched thermal readings flash violently across the emergency monitors. Pressure spike in the east foundation, one technician warned. We are losing containment. Charlotte stood motionless beside the table, staring at the radio clip near the speaker, waiting for his voice. Rain continued pouring around the command trucks while the factory burned against the dark horizon like a wounded furnace refusing to die. Then Marcus's calm voice finally returned through static. I found the main release valve. Daniel grabbed the radio instantly. Can you open it? Marcus tested the wheel once with both hands. It barely moved. Years of corrosion had fused parts of the mechanism nearly shut. Steam hissed harder from the pipes overhead. Working on it now. He planted one boot against the concrete wall and pulled harder. Nothing. The wheel groaned faintly but refused to turn. Marcus stopped for half a second to catch his breath. Heat pressed heavily through the tunnel now. The flashlight flickered once against the walls. Somewhere above him, another deep structural rumble echoed through the building. Charlotte pressed closer to the radio speaker without realizing it. Marcus? She whispered softly. He heard her immediately. Strange how clearly one quiet voice could travel through noise. Still here, he answered. Charlotte closed her eyes briefly after hearing that. Nora watched her carefully. You trust him? She said under her breath. Charlotte stared at the burning factory for a long moment before answering. I trust the way he stays calm when everybody else is afraid. Down inside the tunnel, Marcus removed one glove and reached into his jacket pocket for just a second. His fingers closed around Ava's lucky coin. Small. warm from his body heat. He smiled faintly beneath the mask before sliding it back into place. "All right," he murmured quietly to himself. Then he gripped the wheel again and pulled with everything he had. This time the metal screamed loudly through the tunnel. The wheel shifted 1 inch. Then another. Suddenly a violent rush of steam exploded through the release pipes overhead, with a deafening roar. Marcus stumbled backward against the wall as pressure blasted through the old system like a giant exhale trapped for years beneath the factory foundation. Above ground, the entire east side smoke pattern changed instantly. Thick black clouds burst upward through the rooftop vents before thinning rapidly into lighter gray steam. Several firefighters turned in shock. "Pressure is dropping," a technician yelled. Daniel stared at the monitors in disbelief. "He actually did it." Charlotte looked toward the east wing where flames had stopped spreading for the first time all night. Her breath caught sharply in her chest. Down in the tunnel, Marcus steadied himself against the wall while steam rushed around him in massive waves. The pressure valve continued spinning slowly now on its own, releasing years of trapped force into the night above. Then through the fading roar, he heard another sound. A small metallic clink nearby. Marcus turned his flashlight toward a recessed storage compartment half hidden behind the pipes. Inside sat a weathered steel lockbox coated in dust and condensation. On the front, barely visible beneath rust, were 2 engraved initials. E. W. Edward Whitmore. Marcus stared at the steel lockbox for one brief second while steam thundered through the pipes above him. Then another violent groan rolled across the tunnel ceiling, reminding him the factory was still unstable. He crouched quickly beside the compartment and pulled the box free from years of dust and condensation. Heavy. Old. Important enough for Edward Whitmore to hide beneath the building itself. Marcus tucked it beneath one arm and turned back toward the tunnel ladder. "Command," he said into the radio between breaths. "Pressure release is holding. Begin external cooling on the east wing now." Above ground, firefighters moved instantly. Water streams redirected across the roofline while lighter smoke drifted into the rainy Ohio sky for the first time all night. Daniel stared at the changing thermal monitor with disbelief still frozen across his face. "Temperatures are dropping," one technician whispered. Charlotte did not answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the south access point through sheets of rain. Waiting. Just waiting. Minutes passed slowly. Too slowly. Then, finally, a figure emerged through the smoke near the perimeter fence. Marcus climbed out of the utility hatch soaked in sweat, ash, and condensation. The oxygen tank hung nearly empty against his back. One firefighter rushed forward to steady him, but Marcus waved him off gently. "I am all right," he said quietly, though his legs looked heavy beneath him. Charlotte moved toward him before anyone else could. Her heels splashed through puddles as rain soaked her hair against her face. She stopped only inches away when she saw what he carried beneath one arm. The old steel lockbox. Her breath caught instantly. "What did you find that?" Marcus carefully placed the box into her hands. "Hidden beneath the pressure tunnel." Charlotte stared at the engraved initials on the lid and suddenly looked 20 years younger. Not CO Charlotte Whitmore. Just Edward Whitmore's daughter again. Her fingers trembled against the cold steel. "My father kept his handwritten research journals in a box exactly like this," she whispered. Marcus nodded once. "Then something survived tonight after all." Around them, firefighters continued working beneath the rain, while the east wing smoke slowly faded from black to gray. The building still stood. Damaged. Scarred. But standing. Ava suddenly came running from the ambulance bay wrapped in her oversized blanket. "Daddy!" Marcus dropped to one knee immediately despite exhaustion pulling at his shoulders. Ava threw both arms around his neck while he held her carefully against his chest. Charlotte watched silently as the little girl whispered, "I knew you would come back." Marcus smiled tiredly and kissed the top of her head. "I told you I would try real hard." Charlotte looked down at the lockbox in her hands again. Millions of dollars could rebuild walls. Insurance could replace machinery. But standing there in the rain, Watching a tired firefighter hold his daughter after saving strangers he did not even know, she realized something uncomfortable and beautiful at the same time. The strongest thing inside her factory had never been steel. Marcus slowly stood again with Ava still holding his hand. Charlotte looked at him through the fading smoke and softly asked, "How do you stay that calm when everything is falling apart?" Marcus glanced down at his daughter before answering. "Because somebody is always watching to see if they should be afraid too." The rain continued falling gently around them while the first emergency lights finally began shutting off one by one across the dark parking lot.